You're tired of feeling small in a world that seems built for giants. You look around and see people conquering dreams while you're still struggling to believe in your own. Today, you're going to discover that you're not weak. You simply haven't accessed the power you already carry within yourself. Napoleon Hill spent decades studying minds that turned the impossible into the inevitable. And what he discovered will forever change how you see yourself. There's an invisible line that separates two types of humanity. On one side are those who've accepted mediocrity as their destiny. They wake up every day hoping the world will change for them. They complain about the government, the economy, bad luck, everything except themselves. On the other side are those who chose to be architects of their own reality. They don't wait for opportunities, they create opportunities. They don't ask for permission, they take ownership. They don't cry for justice, they make justice happen. Napoleon Hill observed something fascinating when studying over 500 extraordinarily successful people. All of them had one thing in common that separated them from the masses. It wasn't money, connections, or luck. It was the ability to access a mental power that most people don't even know exists. Hill called this the power of directed subconscious mind. While most people use only 10% of their mental capacity, these individuals learn to access reserves of power that transform thoughts into physical reality. You felt that sensation of being tested by the universe. Every criticism you receive, every door that slams in your face, every time someone doubts your potential, it's not coincidence. It's the universe sculpting a diamond. The pressure doesn't come to break you, it comes to transform you into something unbreakable. Every tear you've shed in silence wasn't a sign of weakness, it was the price you paid to become someone no one can break anymore. When people criticize you, it's not about you. It's about what you represent to them. You represent the possibility of change they don't have the courage to embrace. You represent the action they don't have the strength to take. You represent the future they don't believe they deserve. That's why they attack. That's why they doubt. That's why they try to convince you that you're just like them. But you're not. Hill discovered that every successful person went through a moment of awakening. A moment when they realized they had two choices: accept the limitations others placed on them, or break those mental chains and create their own reality. Andrew Carnegie started as a factory worker, earning pennies a day. Henry Ford was considered a crazy dreamer. Thomas Edison was called a failure more times than you can count. What did they have in common? They refused to accept that their circumstances would define their destinies. You're closer than you think. There's a universal law that few know. The greater the resistance, the closer you are to breakthrough. When everything seems to be falling apart, when criticism intensifies, when loneliness tightens around your chest, it's a sign that you're about to break through a barrier that most never manage to cross. Giving up now would be like stopping digging a well inches from water. The truth is, you're no longer the same person who started this journey. You're part of an invisible minority, a silent tribe of people who chose to grow when it would have been easier to stagnate, who chose to build when it would have been more comfortable to complain, who chose to believe when all data pointed to the impossible. You carry an invisible mark that only others like you can recognize. While the loud ones fight for attention on social media, you're building an empire in silence. While they waste energy explaining their dreams to those who lack the capacity to understand, you invest that energy in turning dreams into reality. Silence isn't shyness, it's strategy. Isolation isn't loneliness, it's focus. Discretion isn't fear, it's concentrated power waiting for the right moment to explode. Napoleon Hill identified that there's a secret code extraordinary people use to reprogram the subconscious mind. First, they create a mental image so clear of what they want that they can smell success. Second, they repeat this image every day until it becomes more real than current reality. Third, they act as if they're already the person they need to be to achieve what they desire. Fourth, they persist even when all external signs say to stop. You've cried thinking you wouldn't make it. Normal. Even lions roar in pain when they're hunting. You felt like giving up when the path became too steep. Natural, even eagles must fight against headwinds to fly higher. You've doubted whether you have what it takes to get where you want to go. Human. Even diamonds question if they'll survive the pressure before discovering their true strength. But in every moment of vulnerability, you chose to continue. That makes you different from 90% of people on this planet. There's a moment in every extraordinary person's journey when they realize they're no longer fighting to prove anything to anyone. They're fighting because they've discovered who they really are. It's no longer about showing others they were wrong about you. It's about honoring the giant you discovered you always were. It's no longer about winning out of pride. It's about winning, because that's what giants do. Hill spent 25 years interviewing millionaires, inventors, leaders, and visionaries. They all came to the same conclusion. The power they accessed was always there. The difference is they stopped looking for this power outside themselves. They stopped waiting for someone to save them. They stopped asking permission to be extraordinary. They simply took ownership of the power that was always theirs by right. When you look at your life today and compare it to who you were a year ago, you can see the transformation. Muscles that grew not just in the body but in the mind. Scars that became medals of honor. Fears that transformed into fuel. You're no longer that person who was afraid to try. You've become someone who's afraid not to try. That's real evolution. The attacks you suffered didn't come to destroy you. They came to reveal what you're made of. Every criticism was a resistance test. Every closed door was an opportunity to build your own entrance. Every no you heard was the universe preparing you for the yes that will change everything. You didn't go through this by accident. You went through this because you were chosen for something greater. There's a fundamental difference between people who achieve the extraordinary and people who stay average. Average people ask if they can. Extraordinary people ask how they can. Average people wait for the right moment. Extraordinary people create the right moment. Average people ask for approval. Extraordinary people take responsibility. Average people daydream. Extraordinary people work so hard, they dream about their goals in their sleep. Napoleon Hill discovered that the subconscious mind doesn't distinguish between real experiences and vividly imagined experiences. This means when you visualize your victory in detail, your mind already begins reorganizing to make that vision reality. Your neurons create new connections. Your body releases different hormones. Your posture changes. Your voice gains authority. You literally become a different person before you even achieve what you want to achieve. There are days you wake up feeling the weight of the world on your shoulders. There are nights you go to sleep questioning if it's worth continuing to fight. There are moments when loneliness squeezes so tight you consider giving up just to have company in mediocrity. But whenever you're about to break, something inside you whispers, "One more day, one more step, one more try." That whisper isn't your imagination. It's the voice of the giant living inside you, refusing to die. People who give up do so because they believe strength means never feeling weak. The truth is the opposite. Real strength is feeling weak and choosing to continue anyway. It's crying and still getting out of bed the next day. It's failing and still trying again the next day. It's being rejected and still knocking on another door the next day. It's being misunderstood and still being authentic the next day. This isn't weakness disguised as strength. This is pure strength. He'll notice something interesting about people who access their internal power. They stop trying to impress and start expressing themselves. They stop trying to be accepted and start accepting themselves. They stop trying to prove their worth and start living their worth. They stop reacting to what happens to them and start creating what happens around them. This shift in mindset is what separates leaders from followers. You've already noticed that the people who criticize your growth the most are the same ones who complain about their own stagnation. That the people who doubt your dreams the most are those who gave up on their own dreams. That the people who try hardest to convince you that you won't make it are those who never really tried. This isn't coincidence. They attack in you what died inside them. They defend in you what's still alive inside them. There comes a moment in the journey when you realize you're no longer competing with other people. You're competing with previous versions of yourself. Every day you choose to grow instead of complain, you win. Every time you choose to build instead of destroy, you win. Every moment you choose to believe instead of doubt, you win. The real competition isn't out there. It's in here. Napoleon Hill spent his entire life looking for the formula for success and discovered there isn't a formula. There's a decision. The decision to stop being a victim of circumstances and start being the author of your own story. The decision to stop waiting for the world to change and start changing the world. The decision to stop asking permission to be extraordinary and simply be extraordinary. When you look into the eyes of people who've accomplished impossible things, you see something that doesn't exist in most people's eyes. It's not arrogance. It's not luck. It's certainty. Certainty that regardless of what happens, they'll find a way. Certainty that even if they fail 1,000 times, the 1,001st attempt might be victory. Certainty that they were made for something greater than average. This certainty isn't born from success. This certainty creates success. You carry within yourself the same spark that created empires, invented revolutionary technologies, wrote works that changed civilizations, led movements that transformed societies. The difference between you and these people isn't talent, luck, or connections. The difference is they accessed the power you're still learning to use. But you're learning, and that makes all the difference. There's a different energy in people who chose to stop underestimating themselves. They walk into rooms and the temperature changes, not because they're better than other people, but because they discovered they're not worse. Not because they're special, but because they stopped acting like they're common. Not because they were born different, but because they chose to be different. Hill discovered that the biggest obstacle between people and their dreams isn't external circumstances. It's internal conversation. It's the stories we tell ourselves about why we don't deserve, why we can't achieve, why we're not capable. When you change these stories, you change your reality. When you stop convincing yourself you're weak and start remembering you're strong, everything changes. There are moments you look back and barely recognize who you were. That person who was afraid to take risks. That person who asked everyone's opinion before making any decision. That person who believed big dreams were for other people. That person didn't die. That person evolved into someone who understands that risks are part of growth. That your own decisions are more valuable than others' approval. That big dreams are especially for people like you. The power Napoleon Hill identified in extraordinary people isn't a gift some are born with and others aren't. It's a skill that can be developed by anyone willing to pay the price. The price isn't money. The price is willingness to leave your comfort zone every day. Willingness to do what needs to be done even when you don't feel like it. Willingness to continue when it would be easier to stop. You no longer need external validation to know you're on the right path. You've developed an internal compass that always points toward growth. It doesn't matter how many people doubt, you know what you're capable of doing. It doesn't matter how many doors close, you know your determination opens paths. It doesn't matter how many obstacles appear, you know your creativity finds solutions. People who change the world aren't people who never felt fear. They're people who felt fear and acted anyway. They aren't people who never doubted themselves. They're people who doubted and chose to try anyway. They aren't people who never failed. They're people who failed and got back up anyway. The difference was never the absence of weakness. The difference was always the presence of courage. Hill spent years studying the mind of Henry Ford, a man who revolutionized not just the automotive industry, but how the world understands production and innovation. Ford didn't have formal higher education. He wasn't born into a wealthy family. He didn't have famous mentors. What he had was an absolute refusal to accept that his limitations would define his possibilities. He accessed a mental power that transformed an idea into an empire. When you started this growth journey, maybe you thought it would be easier, that wanting something badly enough would achieve it quickly, that the universe would conspire in your favor immediately. But you discovered something even better. You discovered you're stronger than you imagined, that you have more endurance than you calculated, that your capacity to reinvent yourself is infinite. This isn't consolation. This is real power. There's a phenomenon that happens to people who access their internal power. They stop comparing themselves to other people and start being inspired by them. They stop seeing others' success as their own diminishment and start seeing it as proof that it's possible. They stop feeling envy and start feeling admiration. This happens because when you know who you are, you don't need to diminish anyone else to feel great. The most dangerous moment in any extraordinary person's journey is when they're about to achieve what they've always wanted. That's when resistance becomes strongest. That's when criticism intensifies. That's when the temptation to give up hits hardest. Hill called this cosmic resistance, as if the universe tested one final time whether you really deserve what you're seeking. Those who pass this final test become legends. You're no longer just seeking material success. You're seeking to become the person you always knew you could be. You're no longer just chasing external goals. You're chasing the most complete version of yourself. You're no longer trying to prove anything to anyone. You're trying to honor the potential you carry within yourself. This is what transforms journeys into missions. Hill observed that people who access extraordinary powers develop a peculiar characteristic. They become impermeable to opinions that don't build them up. Not because they're arrogant, but because they've developed discernment to know whose advice is worth hearing. They know that accepting criticism from people who've never attempted what you're attempting is like asking for directions from someone who's never left home. There are days you wake up feeling like you can conquer the world. There are days you wake up and can barely get out of bed. Both days are part of the journey. The difference is now you understand your strength doesn't depend on how you feel. Your strength comes from what you choose to do, regardless of how you feel. That's emotional maturity. That's real power. The silence you maintain about your projects isn't secrecy from shame. It's strategy from wisdom. You've learned that energy wasted on explanations is energy lacking for execution. That time spent convincing unbelievers is time that could be used creating results. That people who need lots of explanation to believe in you aren't the right audience for your dreams. Napoleon Hill discovered something revolutionary. The subconscious mind works 24 hours a day to materialize what you truly believe. If you believe you're weak, it finds evidence of your weakness. If you believe you're strong, it finds evidence of your strength. If you believe you deserve mediocrity, it creates mediocrity. If you believe you deserve greatness, it creates opportunities for greatness. Your subconscious mind is the most dedicated employee you have, but it only executes the orders you give it. You no longer need external motivation to do what needs to be done. You've developed internal discipline that works regardless of how you feel or what others think. You don't act because you feel like it. You act because you know that's what people like you do. You don't act from emotional impulse. You act from commitment to the person you're becoming. This is what separates amateurs from professionals. The battles you fought alone taught you something you can't learn from books. You're more resilient than any circumstance, more creative than any problem, more determined than any obstacle, stronger than any criticism. This isn't blind optimism. This is real knowledge about who you are when everything's against you. Hill concluded his studies with an impressive discovery. The power that separates extraordinary people from ordinary people isn't in the absence of weaknesses, but in the ability to use those weaknesses as fuel to become stronger. They don't deny their limitations, they transcend them. They don't hide their vulnerabilities, they transform them into connection points with other human beings. They don't pretend they're perfect, they show they're real. The time has come to stop underestimating yourself. The time has come to stop asking permission to be extraordinary. The time has come to access the power that's always been inside you, waiting to be discovered. You're not weak. You never were weak. You simply hadn't accessed all the power you carry. But today that changes. I choose to be unshakable. I choose to access my internal power. I choose to become the person I always knew I could be. I choose to honor the giant living inside me. I'm no longer the person who was afraid to try. I'm the person who's afraid not to try. I'm not weak. I never was weak. I simply hadn't accessed all my power. But now I have.